Hello, and thank you for joining us today. Looks like we've got a global audience, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Scott Dill, and I'm on the business development team here at the Real Story Group. Today's session is going to be a fun one. We've got our company founder, Tony Byrne, on the line, and his presentation is going to focus on the digital workplace. It's a topic that comes up for us every day as we speak with organizations, and they're really trying to understand the concept of a digital workplace and are struggling with how to turn that into a reality. So what Tony's going to do is take us through some best practices and also what that means for traditional intranets and emerging social collaboration spaces. A couple of quick housekeeping items of note. All attendees will be receiving the slides from today's presentation, and for our subscribers on the line, you'll be able to access a recording of the webinar as well. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to enter those into the question window here on GoToMeeting. And with that, I'll turn things over to Tony.
Thanks, Scott. I'm really excited to be here. This is a topic that's near and dear to our hearts at Real Story Group and me in particular, because we've been talking to a number of our subscribers who are some of the biggest enterprises in the world, and I think we can conclude that this transition from a traditional intranet to a modern digital workplace is really one of the most important topics facing enterprises today. We talk a lot about digital transformation and certainly customer digital transformation. We'll talk about that a little bit, but in a workplace setting, when we're talking about digital transformation, it's really around what does this new digital workplace do, and how do I get there? And again, I think this is one of the most urgent topics for us to be addressing, so I'm really excited to spend a fast-paced half hour with you folks today. So a number of you are new to Real Story Group. Just a little bit of background about where we're coming from on this topic. We're an analyst firm. We research by analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of the vendors and their technology. We put them under a microscope, squeeze them, and see what comes out. And we produce research showing, what are the key weaknesses and strengths, not just of the technology, but the vendors itself. And for our subscribers, we also provide advisory services. So we do technology audits, some technology strategies and roadmaps, and we support them with product and vendor selection. And increasingly, we're helping them benchmark their existing environments so that they can sort of see where they're at as a baseline to then plan and measure improvements in their overall effectiveness going forward. We're quite different from really every other analyst firm in the world in as much as we are completely focused on the customer side. That is completely focused on you. We don't consult with vendors. We don't speak at vendor events. We don't let them buy us drinks. We don't write white papers for them. They can't quote us in their press releases. We don't advise them on their roadmaps. And so by working completely for you, the customer, that gives us, I would say, a lot of freedom to tell what we think is the real story. And hopefully you'll pick up quite a bit of that over the next 30 minutes together here. So if we look at the problem as a whole, really the challenge and the opportunity here from intranets to digital workplace, I think if I was going to put it in one sentence, it's from us to you, right? That there's a key conceptual change here. And I see, thank you, William, I see that we were not showing the slides, but hopefully now you can see it. I can tell you didn't miss a whole lot during the intro visually, so William, thank you for that little prompt. So from intranets to digital workplace, this is a little bit of an agenda item here. Conceptually, the issue is with intranets, we were really talking about the enterprise, right? Here's the enterprise publishing. Here's, our view of the world. Us, we publish, you read. And conceptually, the real change around digital workplace is that it's around you, the employee, right? It's not about us, the enterprise. It's really changing the whole grammar of the equation, where the employee is the subject of the sentence, and then the technology that we're delivering to them to make them more effective becomes the object of the sentence. And I think once you make this conceptual shift, a number of things fall out of that. first and foremost, we have to understand what is it that employees, particularly knowledge workers, want. And we've done some meta studies of this. You've probably seen things like this before. But what knowledge workers in particular want is, first of all, autonomy, or what some people call agency, which is, you hired me to make good judgments, let me do that. And don't then in a digital context treat me like a clerk when you ask me to actually be a knowledge worker. And the second one is effectiveness. I want to be good at what I do. This is often rated the #1 thing that knowledge workers want. We all want to be better at what we do. But then when we are effective, we want to be recognized. We want people to notice my good work. And so what this means is that more contemporary, rather than traditional intranets, more contemporary social collaboration services need to lie at the heart of any digital workplace. And what this means in particular is a whole number of things that, when people say, well, how is a digital workplace different from an intranet? In general, an intranet is very information heavy, whereas a digital workplace is going to be very services heavy. So instead of email groups and static manuals and news and organizational section heads and collections of websites, you have online communities with more signaling instead of email. Searchable knowledge bases, often fueled by social enrichment, peer-to-peer sharing, intelligent and social Q&A, lightweight dashboards, and ultimately a collection of services instead of a collection of websites. The question then becomes, as a practical matter, how do we get there? And I think that there's really 3 questions then that we need to answer to get from an intranet to a digital workplace. First, how do we connect leader and employee aspirations in a business context? In other words, how do we connect this us, the leadership and the enterprise aspirations, with you, the employee, in the business context? Then secondly, where are we today, and particularly how effective are we? Can we actually set up a baseline? But then third, how do we then take practical steps to migrate to a true digital workplace? So that's the agenda for the rest of our time together. And I'll remind you, incidentally, that if you have any questions or comments or anything you disagree with about, feel free to use the questions tab in the GoToMeeting control panel. Okay, how do we connect enterprise and employee needs? How do we connect you and us? So today there's really what we call a social collaboration gap, that at an executive level, there's a lot of aspirational desires. Specifically, we need to collaborate more. We need to bust these silos that are separating us. A lot of this is mom and apple pie stuff, but clearly, important from an executive or an organizational level. But then when you go down to the staff level, people have very practical, instrumental sorts of needs. Like, we need the right answers, right? Tell me what I'm supposed to do here. Somebody show me some best practices around this. Surely we've done this before. Does somebody have an example? Who's our expert on XYZ? So, do humans at a staff level want to collaborate more? Yes, but they want to do it in the context of being more effective in their jobs. So they have very specific sorts of questions and needs and tasks. And I think the big challenge of social collaboration technology to date has been to try to align these sorts of things. You have a lot of gurus and analysts who talk about it at the executive level, sort of with these aspirations that, we need to do a better job of collaborating together and using our common resources together. But I think actually the key lies at more the staff level. What are some of the practical aspirations? So how do we then bring these two together? And our argument is that you use business applications to close this gap. That there's specific applications that will both bring value to the enterprise, but more importantly, bring value to people actually getting work done at a workaday level. So in a social collaboration context, there's really about 10 or 12 canonical application archetypes: knowledge-based management, external collaboration, project collaboration, adaptive case management, communities, innovation support, enterprise conversation, social Q&A, socializing legacy processes, and expertise location. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of these, but the key thing here is that these are applications, right? They're not features like blogs, wikis, and so on. They're actual applications that drive business value in particular business contexts. And they're also really archetypes, so there can be different types of knowledge bases. Some can be more locked down and more fluid. Different types of project collaboration. Some can be more structured and therefore more amenable to like a SharePoint team space, whereas others are much more fluid and communications oriented and therefore probably better suited to like a Slack, which is a tool we've just started covering in our research. So there's different types of models within these, but that these are archetypes and that these are the targets that you should be seeking. So instead of sort of rolling out an overall enterprise social network or a big platform like SharePoint to say, okay, we're going to collaborate more because we have SharePoint, instead focus on which ones of these applications are really going to drive business value. We found that there's really 6 of these that are table stakes. So we've looked across our whole subscriber base and we've figured out that these 6 that you see here, you really want to get good at these. That these are what your peers are driving towards, and so it doesn't mean that the other 5 or 6 are not important. It's just that these are kind of baseline ones. You need to be doing these well, and then once you do these well, then you can sort of innovate and experiment in other cases. So, for example, communities for sharing best practices. Here's an example of a community site, and communities have very specific rhythms and norms. One of the things you want to see from a technology standpoint is that there are community management services, because we know that community management, or what some people call community facilitation, is really important for the success of your communities. But communities tend to be very evergreen and persistent, whereas projects typically have a goal and a start and a beginning. Communities take on kind of a life of their own and evolve over time, and we know that people who do communities really effectively show better business results and also higher levels of employees' effectiveness and satisfaction. So this is a very specific application. It may be built on discussion services and document sharing and a whole other set of building blocks, but it's an actual application to support a community in what it needs to do. Right? So it's a business application. And this is why we really have a dilemma with some of the big platforms. So I'll take SharePoint, for example. SharePoint has a variety of different functional services. It does some well, some not so well. This is from our own research into SharePoint, looking at this from a purely feature standpoint. And so nominally, SharePoint is feature complete in as much as it can sort of check the box on nearly all of these social collaboration features, and some of them better than others, obviously. But the real issue with SharePoint is that if you look at it from an application standpoint, in terms of key business applications, it's somewhat application poor. And I think this is always been the dilemma with SharePoint, that it's feature-rich but application poor. Microsoft is not the only one who shares this problem. IBM also really targets only a couple of different scenarios, and Oracle as well really is dialed in on trying to socialize some legacy processes by putting social capabilities into some of their ERP and their HR systems. So, the reality is that as a digital workplace leader, you're going to have your work cut out for you to be thinking about transitioning from a static intranet to a more interactive set of social and collaboration applications that will make your employees more effective. You're really going to have to either bend or supplement a number of these major platforms to get the applications that you need. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but so the bottom line here is really think about application services, business application services, to transition from us to you. Right now, a number of you have already started on this journey, and I recognize a number of the names on this webinar, and so it's great to see you all and to see you back here. And so a number of you have already been on this journey. And so the question then really to ask yourself is, how effective are we right now? Can we get a baseline and then measure and compare ourselves against others, and then use that to then help us create a roadmap going forward? And the short answer is yes, you can. This is a new service from RealStory Group. It's called RealScore. You can try it out for free. And what it does is you pick a technology domain like enterprise collaboration and social software, and then you then answer a series of questions and ultimately get a score, and then can compare yourself against peers in your industry and in other industries as well. And so here's an example of an output. If we just take sort of Acme Corporation, they scored a 37, which is actually relatively low. They seem to be, in particular, suffering with respect to organizational development, business capabilities, whereas their system score may be a little bit higher. So it's telling them, okay, from a systems standpoint, systems maturity standpoint, systems capability standpoint, maybe we're doing okay, but clearly we have some issues that we have to address around organizational development and business capabilities. Now, what's interesting about this, if we take Acme and then we compare them against the manufacturing industry average and the cross-industry average, here in particular, we see them sort of lagging behind. So they can use this then to sort of say, hey, compared to our peers, we need to be doing X, Y, Z to catch up or even leapfrog ahead of them. What's interesting about this, and one of the reasons why we did this, is that almost every one of our subscribers sort of self-reported themselves as being quote-unquote behind. Almost every conversation that I would have with digital workplace leaders, they'd say, well, with respect to social collaboration, we feel really behind. There's all these great case studies out there, and we've been skinning our knees and really struggling. And the fact is that only half of you can be behind. So we came up with a very data-driven approach to sort of help you understand, hey, where are you right now? And of course, there's a lot of pieces that then go into this. So even if we just talk about organizational development, there's a number of things here for you to take a look at. So there's a more fine-grained approach around things like community management, culture and alignment, governance, staffing, so on and so forth. So again, I encourage you to go to our website, check out the tools, and fill this out for yourself and kind of see, where you're at. Once you can measure where you're at, then we can talk about, okay, what are the steps going forward? So how do we get from here to there? And here again, I'm going to start with kind of a conceptual approach and then boil it down into some practical next steps. This is a traditional view of the digital workplace. Some people call this pejoratively a layer cake diagram. And this is a traditional enterprise architecture view. So again, this is about us. Enterprise architecture is important. We've used this particular reference model with a number of our subscribers to help them kind of evaluate where they're at with respect to different things. But you can see what's missing here. What's missing here is the employee, right? This is all about the systems that we have and how they fit together. And so that's a useful way in particular of inventorying and perhaps assessing our current environment, but it doesn't necessarily tell us where to go forward. So we need a different sort of reference model for that. And the reference model that we've developed is what we call the employee-centered digital workplace reference model. And what this does is put the employee at the center and their needs and their aspirations, and then works outward from there to how effectively or what are the different types of capabilities that the enterprise needs to bring to bear. So there's a lot here, and I won't go into all the details. You can find some more research around this on our site. But essentially, you have in yellow here the employees and their aspirations, the things that they need to do, which is work together, work on their own, work more effectively. Then the blue area here are specific applications, and the gray are the business platforms underneath those applications. And then the purple are the enterprise services that typically IT needs to deliver. The interesting part about this is this sort of gray-blue distinction that I'm making here between business platforms in gray and the specific applications in blue. And if you are going to transition to an employee-centric digital workplace, then you need to make sure that business people are owning the blue. So you can have IT owning the gray, which is the underlying platforms, the underlying collaboration platforms, the underlying human capital management platforms, the underlying productivity platforms, but you really need to recruit and empower business product managers to own the specific applications, because remember, it's the applications that drive the value for their fellow employees. So there's a kind of I'm getting a little bit of applause there from next door. There's another workshop going on, but clearly that thought of product management clearly resonates not just here. It certainly resonated a lot among our subscriber base, but a big part of the transition from intranet to digital workplace is business ownership of these applications, the specific applications, not necessarily the platforms, but definitely the applications, and managing them like products rather than projects. There's a number of things you can do with this reference model. Here's one where, we could argue that we could do traditional stoplight analysis. And it's been very interesting doing this with some of our subscribers, the different variations in terms of where they're at. So again, this is another way to kind of baseline and assess, how well are we doing at these sorts of things. This was a particular enterprise where they had put a lot into groupware and video conferencing, not a lot into collaboration and social. And so this was a way of visualizing kind of where they were at and where they needed to go, going forward with respect to their internal capabilities. But I think even the more intriguing potential for this model is to think about it to come back to this whole notion of being employee-centric. So I don't love everything that Stephen Covey says, but I always liked this quote, which was always treat your employees exactly as you want to treat your best customers. And so the interesting thing about this is that there's a very similar reference model that we have on the digital marketing side called the customer-centered digital reference model, where the customer is at the center of your systems, and then you have the same sort of set of concentric circles leading outwards with respect to journeys and platforms and enterprise services. And I'm going to argue that with respect to digital marketing, this battle has already been defined, right? Everybody understands you have to have customer-centric digital engagement. And consequently, there's a whole set of methodologies that have evolved to support digital marketers in this. And a lot of this goes under a lot of names. I prefer the acronym UCD for user-centered design, and all of the different methodologies around user-centered design that make people more successful at engaging with prospects and customers. The good news is you can use those exact same methodologies in a workplace setting. And so what really an employee centered digital workplace calls the question on your methodology that if you are going to do this, you have to get out of the mold of we are intranet managers publishing stuff, or we are collaboration coaches helping people use SharePoint better, and instead say we are employee advocates, and we are going to look at the entire digital experience from the screen backwards rather than from systems forward. And we're going to be employee-centered rather than enterprise-centered. And we are going to be intentional about using methodologies that are known to be effective around this, around user journeys, top tasks, and workplace contextual inquiry. Right? This is really a new role for the digital workplace team, to be the UX advocate for all applications. And the key, again, is to focus on those applications in blue. Drop this terminology around websites, team sites, features, news, even content. And I say content reluctantly there because, of course, we're a content provider ourselves. But the point is that you have to get out of the publishing business and more into the facilitation business. And your employees have to be defining your priorities. And there's a whole set of methodologies around how to do that you can use. And that's how you get from an intranet to a digital workplace. Now, let's take a look at some data. This was from a survey we just released today. You can go to our blog and get some details about it, including a copy of the data yourself. And this is very interesting. This is how do people self-report about their organization's journey. And the interesting thing, I'll commend your attention to the far right. Basically, 1 in 12 of you have said that you've created an employee-centric digital workplace. That sounds about right to me. So what this suggests is that for the rest of us, the other 11 and 12, we still have our work cut out. And the good news is 28% of you are beginning to think about this. You're trying to expand your scope, but more than half of you, almost 2/3 of you, are still sort of operating in a traditional paradigm here. This, again, this comes back to this notion, everybody sort of feeling behind. Well, at some level, we are all kind of behind on this. We've been talking about digital workplaces for a while now, but haven't necessarily always been taking a lot of practical steps. So let's talk a little bit about institutionally what this means. This is sort of the three kind of traditional loci of digital workplace owners: KM, knowledge management, corporate communications, and IT. It doesn't work this way in every organization, but has been this is a sort of traditional approach to this. And I'm going to suggest that you sort of rethink this and instead really get HR into this sort of pantheon of institutional characters here. And I deliberately put HR at the top. We found that across our subscriber base, that there's greater effectiveness when HR is an active partner, if not actually leading this. Now, there's a lot of issues around this, that many HR organizations are scarred from very difficult technology implementations. There isn't always a lot of digital savvy there. But I believe that they're uniquely positioned to align offline and digital employee experience, and that if the goal is employee effectiveness, then who's the natural advocate for that? It really can and should come from HR. It doesn't mean that IT doesn't have a role. It does. It doesn't mean the KM doesn't have a role. It does. Corporate communication still obviously very important, although their role has to very much transform under this new world. But you really want to figure out a way, if you haven't already, to engage your HR partners, to educate them, and to really kind of bring them in as leaders if you haven't already. This is just a little anecdote. Airbnb, their chief human resource officer becomes the chief employee experience officer. I thought that was very interesting. And so naturally, this is only going to follow that she's also then clearly going to be, to the extent that many employee experiences are now primarily digital, then naturally the digital employee experience is going to be an increasingly important part of her purview. The other thing that this means for digital workplace leaders as opposed to intranet leaders is you're going to have to get savvy about a wider set of technologies. Maybe in the past you knew about CMS tools and certain collaboration tools, probably SharePoint being among them. And now we know that there's a lot more to this. So this is our subway map that we've just updated that shows a variety of digital workplace and digital marketing technologies, where the different colored subway lines here are different types of technologies. And historically, intranet managers have known, maybe the green line, which is portals, the blue line, which is web. Clearly, there's a lot of collaboration and social technology across this whole landscape. On the red line, ECM becomes important, potentially digital asset management and others. So as a leader in this space, it's incumbent on you to not necessarily, become a technologist yourself, but to really become much more conversant in the wide set of tools that constitute your colleagues' digital workplace experience. This also has an impact really on kind of strategic alternatives, and this has been a very interesting conversation we've been having with a number of our subscribers around, do I align around a major platform like a SharePoint or the IBM stack or the Oracle stack, or even in some cases people are looking seriously into Salesforce, or, go more best of breed? And the answer is, probably neither and both, but just the fact that we're having this conversation suggests that there's a time of flux here, and I predict that the future of the digital workplace is going to be from an architectural standpoint, a lot more complex than it is today with respect to the number of different services, but also potentially more simpler with respect to the actual employee experience. So a lot to talk about here. We can pick this up in the Q&A, but this again, I wanted to sort of bring us round trip that taking some of these practical steps that we talked about around really starting with the employee experience and working back into the enterprise is going to challenge a lot of us from our sort of incumbent architectural assumptions. It also means we need to get smarter about how we bring technology into the enterprise. Obviously, you don't want to use these shallow sort of quadrants. The way to do this is to be, much more agile in the way that you select technology, to do some research to come up with the right short lists and put together the right kinds of high-quality RFPs. Make sure that anything you do is very empirical and based on actual test cases and not long Excel spreadsheets. I'm being a little self-serving here because this is what we do for a living, which is producing these sorts of research and templates. But, this is whether you use us or you use a different analyst firm, this is totally the way to go, to take a more agile and iterative approach to the way that you bring technology into the organization to make sure that you're serving the needs of not just the enterprise, but first and foremost your colleagues. So here's various ways you can stay in touch with us: by email, certainly LinkedIn. You can get a free sample of our research at realstorygroup.com/excerpt. And Scott, I'll let you talk about next steps while I gather some of the questions. A number of questions have come in. So Scott, you want to just fill in on some of the details here while I look at some of the questions?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony. And we certainly hope that was helpful information as you look to turn the employee-centered digital workplace into more of a reality within your organization. Just as a quick reminder, Tony and all of our analysts are available for advisory calls with our Plus subscribers. We can certainly help as you navigate through your digital journey and use the subscriber tools available on our site for building a custom shortlist and comparing vendors head-to-head, and also benchmarking the effectiveness of your technology, as Tony mentioned, with the RealScore product. if you're not a customer yet, we would encourage you to reach out to engage@realstorygroup.com, and we'd be happy to walk you through the Real Story Group subscriber experience and review the different subscription options that are available. Tony, looks like you have a few questions there.
Yeah. So a couple of people, Katan and Carol, asking if they will be getting the deck, and yes, you will be getting the deck. And if your organization subscribes to our research, you'll also have full on-demand access to the entire video presentation. Chris is asking, what is the KM acronym? So sorry about that. You know, as analysts, sometimes we throw on acronyms too much. KM in this case stands for knowledge management. So knowledge management, particularly in larger firms, historically, whether it was passively or actively practiced, a really important piece of any kind of intranet or digital workplace experience. So special hello to Nadine. And Brian is asking about Slack and other new sort of simpler workspaces. They seem like another silo that needs to be integrated with the process. And that's right. I think you can look at these tools as silos. I tend to look at them as applications. As a practical matter, they can create silos of data. One of the things that's good about Slack is that it's been pretty good about integrating with other systems, particularly repository systems like document management and file sharing services. But Slack came to really fill a need. So if we go back to our 10 or 11 canonical use cases, one of them is around project-oriented collaboration, and a lot of project-oriented collaboration tools like SharePoint were very heavy and very structured and very formalistic, and sometimes our projects should be heavy and structured and formalistic and repeatable. But a lot of projects, particularly around digital, which is where Slack really started, was in the interactive agency world, are more around communication and fluid and ad hoc sort of collaboration. And so that's really that variant that Slack came and filled that hole. And so once again, you know, what is Slack? Is it an enterprise social network? Is it a chat service? Is it a discussion forum? Is it an integration platform? Well, it's a little bit of all of those. What it really is an ad hoc team communication service, and the world needed that application, and Slack really came through and delivered it for us. So I think you know, we now have included Slack as part of our evaluations. We've written what I would describe as a highly critical evaluation of Slack. It has a number of demerits and shortcomings that are very important for you to understand, and we certainly know among some of our subscribers some of them who have taken up Slack and then ultimately rejected it. So it's a little bit overhyped, but at the same time, I think Slack tells us that sometimes there are needs that need to be addressed, sometimes very specific needs that are deeply important for the employees struggling at the coalface. And so maybe the future of the digital workplace is not one big behemoth platform like SharePoint, which can't do none of the things that Slack does. Maybe it's going to be a number of these different services. And then from an architectural perspective, the challenge for us is how do we put these all together in a coherent way? So great question, Brian. Nicholas is also sort of angling on this too, where I had talked about the best alternative is a hybrid between platform and best-of-breed services, but then does it become even more complicated? Why not stay in one of these two main strategies? So that's a good question, Nicholas. I mean, I think that probably jumped the gun by saying that a hybrid was the best option. I do believe that some hybrid is the most likely option, particularly for larger enterprises who have already made significant investments in large platforms, that they're not just going to wake up tomorrow and go totally best of breed. On the other hand, we also know from organizations that have gone totally best of breed that that's been a real challenge for them to not have some center of gravity, particularly around things like having a core profile, right? Like, so where does my profile live? What system is aggregating all of the different elements in an activity stream? So so I won't prejudge this to say that all three are bad alternatives. I think there's a case to be made for all three, but we have to be a little bit open-minded that this notion that the only best architecture was a sort of platform-oriented architecture, we need to get away from that and be open to the best-of-breed alternative, or what I think is more likely, which is for large organizations, maybe some sort of a hybrid architecture. And it's been interesting. We've been really focused a lot on this with a number of our subscribers recently, and I think a number of organizations are moving in that direction. And so whether, Nicholas, there's a center of gravity or not, I I don't know. I think what we have to understand is that in the real world, the center of gravity already exists in many of these organizations, and they can't just totally upend it, at least not overnight. So anyway, with that, we've run a little bit late. Thank you for hanging in there, folks. Obviously, a topic that we're very passionate about here at Real Story Group, and if there's any way that we can help you on this journey, please feel free to reach out to us. And in the meantime, thanks for joining us today, and please have a great rest of your week.